Hello, Prancers and Pikachus, my name is TPSkine, and I'm dragging myself away from Elden Ring for a minute. By the way, please watch my series, The Boss Designs of Elden Ring, because I'm working really hard on it and I'm proud of it. But I'm dragging myself away from Elden Ring to talk about the thing that, realistically, most of my audience is actually subscribed to the channel for, which is League of Legends, which has done an interesting thing recently. Interesting, albeit also oddly unmotivated? Riot has, for several years now, taken a sort of Easter Bunny delight in implying in vague terms that League of Legends, the IP, is the nexus of a multiverse. The lore and voice lines for a number of skins imply the idea of parallel universes and multiple timelines, and, more recently, Arcane was explicitly spun off from the main canon as a parallel timeline to give that show greater freedom to tell its own story without having to check in with the latest main universe retcon every 2 months. And that multiverse idea has mostly been a Easter egg for weird nerds who meticulously watch every special interactions voice line video on Skin Spotlights. It's me, I am weird nerds, but it was plainly not supposed to be taken any more seriously than just that. It's Easter eggs and fan theory fodder. It's the sort of thing that probably would have inspired a lot of fun fanfiction if Riot had actually ever managed to encourage the growth of a thriving and active fanfiction community. I mean, it does have one now, but let's be real, it's 99% Arcane. And Arcane does seem to have been the spark for an escalation on the multiverse tease, because as part of promotion for Arcane, Riot released an online visual novel which featured a multiverse plot, where characters from Arcane had their worlds mixed up with the prime League of Legends timeline with Legends of Runeterra, but also featured appearances from the Teamfight Tactics cast and Valorant. Once again, the tone of the visual novel suggested that it should be seen as little more than a novelty, not an explicit confirmation of a shared multiverse that we should expect to see developed. At least, that's what I thought. But then Riot went and did something weird, and something that, if we are not supposed to expect an interconnected multiverse, seems creatively unmotivated. They released If Piltover and Zaun have an overarching theme, it is class conflict. Zaun is an industrialized, toxic mess of pollution, exploitation, and poverty, while in Piltover the nobles and wealthy merchant classes squabble over social and political power, turning a blind eye to the suffering and deprivation caused by the industry that guarantees their wealth. A lot of Piltover and Zaun champions respond to these injustices in some way that is key to their story. Seraphine seeks to bring the population of the two cities together with empathy. Camille ruthlessly executes Zaunites who aspire to join the ranks of Piltover's nobility. Victor tries to engineer away those parts of humanity that make them vulnerable to suffering, while Orianna lost her humanity to the poisons of Zaun, trying to save its population. More recently, Renata Glask has been introduced, trying to beat Piltover at its own game, while Warwick struggles with his inhuman nature, taking out his rage at the murderous and abusive elements in the Undercity. Ekko, on the other hand, is somewhat unique, because rather than be miserable in his oppressed city, he is an idealist in favor of it, rejecting the opportunity to study in Piltover because he loves his community and wants to build it up to be something better, rather than just escape its problems. In a region where so many characters are defined by tragedy and suffering caused by the city's miserable state, Ekko's optimism is a breath of fresh air, and it's honestly one of the best things about the character. And I guess Riot agrees with me because they basically just copied that and made Zeri out of it. Oh, okay, that's not quite fair. Part of the point of Ekko is that he has all the qualities that Piltover likes to claim defines their population and culture. He's an innovator, he's resourceful, he's optimistic, and a visionary, brilliant inventor. Ekko refuses to let Piltover claim him because he believes that the qualities that live in him are in Zaun as much as Piltover, and he's living proof of that. Zeri, while she shares Ekko's optimistic love of her city and community and drive to make it better, she is less grounded in the conflict with Piltover and more grounded in the conflicts that Zaun has with itself. Okay, this is not really important to the video, but Zeri's biography is kind of bad? Well, it's not bad, the core of it is perfectly fine, but it feels a lot like a draft that wasn't finished in editing yet. Like, it describes how the Chem Barons are indifferent to the people who live in Zeri's community, and so they start digging under her neighborhood for resources, which causes a huge earthquake that almost kills a bunch of people. Zeri uses her powers to save them, and then the story is like, her act of defiance will surely bring down the wrath of the Chem Barons upon her. And she has to make this special suppressing jacket and hide her powers and do the Spider-Man thing of like, oh, they'll attack my family to get to me, I'm putting them in danger, but hang on, all she did was save people who the Chem Barons weren't trying to kill. Like, they were just mining for resources, and the point was they didn't care if their mining caused death and destruction to people. She didn't foil their plot by using her powers, she didn't even stop them from mining, so at this point, why would they see her as a threat? Now, after that, the story describes Zeri actually attacking the Chem Barons because she knows they're gonna come for her family, at which point, yeah, it makes sense that they would come after her, but the biography for some reason puts that cart way before the horse, and it creates this weird narrative recursion where she attacks the Chem Barons because she knows they'll come after her community in retaliation for her attacking them because she knows they'll come after her community. It's also extremely vague what Zeri is even trying to accomplish, like, because it would make sense if she attacked the mining facility that's threatening to destroy her community, but she doesn't, or at least the bio doesn't say. It just says she does something non-specifically huge and destroys Chem Baron supply lines, whatever the hell that means. And then the story is like, so the Chem Barons made an alliance to beat her, and then they beat her, and then she was sad and felt alone, without at all elaborating on what Zeri actually did or how the Chem Barons defeated her. And the theme is obviously that her defiance against the Chem Barons inspires a community who rally around her, but wow, does the bio not do a good job of actually telling the story of how it happens. On a more positive note, the color story is actually really solid. It lays out a specific plot where the Chem Barons are kidnapping people from her community for nefarious purposes. She goes to save them, gets into a big spectacular fight with the Baron's men, and shows in concrete terms the ways in which she works together with her community in solidarity to foil the people who try to oppress them. That one is good, but the bio just really needed a lot more work. Anyway, like I said, thematically, Zeri is all about the conflicts that are internal to Zaun. She grows up in a poor, working-class community where they don't have a lot to go around, but everyone looks out for each other. She's born with electrical magic powers that have a tendency to go a bit haywire, and for a long time she feels like a misfit in her community because half of the blackouts in her neighborhood are basically her fault by accident. Then, the Chem Barons begin to undermine her neighborhood and cause an earthquake with their digging, and Zeri is able to use her powers to rescue people from the collapsing buildings, which earns her a lot of respect from the community and also acts as a moment of self-realization for her. Her powers, which were once undirected and chaotic, find a purpose, and so does she. She realizes that she has the power to protect her community, and she realizes who they need protection from. So she starts her war against the Chem Barons, and her community rallies around her, making the gear that she needs, her gun, her batteries, her jacket, and they protect her and support her just as she protects and supports them. Piltover is never mentioned in Zeri's lore. The source of her community's troubles, at least the immediate source, is the exploitative callousness of the Chem Barons who rule Zaun with gangs of violent toughs. And this makes sense thematically. Zeri is all about how the community of Zaun standing together can uplift each other and in solidarity make their world a better place. Oh, hey, Karl Marx, what are you doing here? Anyway, Zeri's enemy is the Chem Barons, Zaunites who exploit their fellow Zaunites for personal gain and profit, rather than help. Where Ekko is thematically about rejecting the propaganda that Piltover is inherently better than Zaun, Zeri rejects selfishness as a response to deprivation. Both characters emerge from the idea of love of community, but they explore it in different ways. As ever, it's a complete roll of the dice whether Riot will ever actually develop any of Zeri's lore in the next few years, which is frustrating because it makes it impossible to know whether there's any point investing in her story, or whether we should just consider her one of the lost characters that never get expanded upon, like so many others in the game. I guess if we're very lucky, she'll cameo in Arcane Season 3. As a design, Zeri is what I would describe as a really solid B+ effort. That is to say, there's nothing wrong with her, really. There aren't any big flaws that I can put my finger on, and her design has a lot of good features to recommend it. It just also isn't, like, a banger. It doesn't have any special surprise or subversion or a uniquely interesting idea that sets it apart from everything else. As a result of that, she looks great in League of Legends, but you could probably plop her into any number of other IPs and she wouldn't look too out of place. Drop Zeri in an Overwatch map and most people would probably be like, yeah, sure, that could be a new hero, why not? And the reason for this, I think, is twofold. First of all, she's a conventionally good-looking, skinny, athletic girl, which in video game character design terms makes her about as unique as short-haired white male protagonist with optional stubble. You absolutely can make a lot of good and interesting characters from that template, but the template itself is so chronically overused that whatever character you create will, by definition, be, one more face in a crowd. The second reason is that Zeri's design makes a conscious and intentional decision to somewhat subvert the general aesthetic of her region. Zaun, remember, is a steampunky late 1800s, early 1900s society, anachronistically mixed with modern punk aesthetics. So you get a lot of overalls, a lot of undyed thick leather, lots of basic fabrics mixed together haphazardly, and then shocks of ostentatious color from hair dyes or graffiti tags. Everyone wears boots and leather shoes, and absolutely everyone has belts, tools, pouches, or machinery strapped to themselves. Zaun also has a lot of bare metal prosthetics looking sort of very functional, contrasting with the brass and gold refinement of Piltover's mechanical enhancements. Zeri steps outside of that paradigm a little bit, leaning less on early industrialization or punk aesthetics and more on a somewhat more contemporary street fashion vibe, running around with a big jacket, a simple colorful top, and what are unmistakably jeans with a bit of ornamented texture. Now, to be clear, it's not that she doesn't look like she could be from Piltover and Zaun, it's that she doesn't quite look like she's definitely from Piltover and Zaun. It's sort of the same problem that Seraphine has a little bit where, yeah, you could say that a Piltover pop star would look that way, but nothing about her look places her definitely 100% for sure in Piltover and Zaun. Seraphine wouldn't look out of place in any given JRPG or anime gacha game, and Zeri could fit in quite comfortably in a game like Overwatch, Fortnite, Paladins, or Valorant. And to reiterate, it's not that Zeri's character design is bad. It's not. In fact, I honestly don't think it does anything wrong as such. There's nothing wrong with subverting or expanding the aesthetics of Zaun. There's no rule that says that characters can't dress different from how we've seen them dress before. The trouble for me is that Zeri's lore very specifically says that 1. Zeri is an ordinary working class kid from Zaun from an ordinary working class Zaun community, and 2. Zeri is really concerned with fitting in to that community. Her lore, her story tells us that she's someone who's fiercely proud of her hometown, her local community, fiercely protective of it, and whose entire identity revolves around being a part of it. So when her character design subverts general Zaun fashion, when it gives her a special modernistic streetwear style, when it places her aesthetically in a place that isn't quite Zaun, I think there's a conflict with the story there. The tension, the difference would work if Zeri was someone who's eager to break free from her class background, or who's an outsider, who's separate and apart from her community in Zaun, but she isn't. Compare her with Ekko and his crew, who similarly love their city and their community, but who are much more grounded in typical Zaun aesthetics. Next to them, Zeri doesn't quite look like she lives in quite the same century or culture, at least not to me. And I should say, it's possible that I'm being too critical. She still mostly looks like she's from Zaun. It's probably not that big of a deal. There's no reason to fixate on it like I'm doing right now. Except there is. There's something else about Zeri that makes me wonder whether she was designed to look this way because it's what's right for her character as part of Runeterra, or because it makes her look right for something else. But put a pin in that, because first we have to discuss. And so you leave the safe harbor of Scripted Skyne behind, a man who knows what he's going to say from one moment to the next, and you join me in the roiling sea of unscripted Skyne, who has only a vague idea from one second to another what's going to come out of his mouth. I mean, I do have my notes, and I'm looking at them, but this is decidedly more extemporaneous. We'll see if I can hammer it into shape in the edit. Probably, though, I'm going to say something about animation, because that's what we're here to talk about, and I like to start with champions oftentimes with their idle animation, because I find that the idle is often a rich opportunity for storytelling with these champions. It's an opportunity to do a little bit of casual passive storytelling about who is this character as a person, how do they behave when they have nothing else going on. And on initial inspection with Zeri, it kind of seems like not much, frankly. There really doesn't seem to be much personality going on here, because she's really just kind of standing there, gently moving up and down in beat with a standard type of breathing cycle. There is, though, a little thing happening, which you've probably already noticed, which is happening in her face, where there is some genuinely very subtle facial animation going on here. Like, she's got the eyebrow wiggle thing, her eyes are darting back and forth a little bit, but there's also this little bit of an opening and closing of the mouth, sort of in time with her breathing, which is an interesting animation choice to make, because, like, when you're looking at Zeri in-game, you ain't gonna see that. Like, that's not really gonna register to you unless you're stopping the game to stand still and look very closely at her idle animation. Something I've gotten in trouble for doing in games more than once. Part of the reason why I was a terrible League of Legends player. Thank God, and you really should, that I don't make gameplay content. But it's one of those animation choices that the animators make, even though it's not, like, players aren't gonna see it, really. Like, they're really not gonna notice that going on with Zeri. And there's a few reasons for that. Like, part of the reason can be that champion character models in-game have gotten better and better and better over the years. And at this point, they like to use the champion models that they make for the game to do little promotional animations for things here and there. And so, in order to make the characters able to do that, they have to add the animation bones that allow them to do these things, do these animations with their faces. And since they're there, I mean, you give an animator a character and they can't resist doing fun stuff with them. So that might be part of the reason. Like, there might be a production reason. It might just be the animator having fun. Who knows? I like it. Like, it does give her a little bit of a sense of sort of an impatient energy. Like, the eyes are going back and forth. The eyebrows are constantly going. Like, she's constantly having thoughts running through her head that she's reacting to. But other than that, this is like a fairly passive idle animation. Not much interesting going on with it. But champions in League of Legends don't only have one idle animation. Usually they'll have multiple little bits of animation that sort of kick in. If you leave the champion standing still for long enough, they'll jump into a variation on their idle, which might look something like this. And here is where the meat of the character really comes through for Zeri. Because here, the idle animation tells us something about who she is, about her disposition, about her approach to the world. Specifically, that tells us you can't fucking stand still. Like, some champions, when you leave them alone for a while, maybe they'll adjust their posture and stand up straight and sort of more relaxed. Maybe they'll pick a bit of lint off their shoulder. Maybe they'll sort of look around quizzically going, hey, are we gonna move? Is something gonna happen? Like, all those little gestures that sort of like, if you leave this person alone and you don't give them anything else to do or any input or any stimulation, how do they react to their surroundings? And in Zeri's case, it's by doing this little hop skippity dance kind of thing that she's doing, where she's like almost like she's kind of revving herself up, or as though she's sort of trying to get rid of some nervous energy she has inside herself, because she's like, just go. Like, you get this sense of almost like a puppy getting ready to go for a walk, right? It's like a jump, bouncy up and down thing. And it has a really nice youthful energy. It fits her theme of being like an electric kid. Like, literally being the sort of hyperactive kid who can't sit still, which is part of her personality and her character. She's very impulsive. And that does come through here. Like, and it has a sort of dance-like quality to it as well. It's a little bit like she's doing a little dance. It's not just jumping up and down. She's like wiggling her hips and doing a little slightly rhythmical thing. And I think that does a really good job of communicating the kind of character that Zeri is. Like, even looking at it from the in-game perspective, like, you kind of get that little wiggle, like, come on, like, getting ready to go, getting ready to do the thing that I want to do. And I really appreciate that. Like, I think it's quite nice. So if we slow this down quite a bit, we also can see that this is a deceptively more complex animation than you'd think at first glance. Now, you think it just bounce up and down and there's not much to it, but there is actually quite a bit to it. First of all, take a look at the hips, right? When she does the bounce, like, it's not just that she's bouncing straight up and down. You can see that she's rotating the hip joint, right? Like, she's rotating her hip around her torso a little bit and, like, moving, like, getting those legs moving up and down. And you can see there's also a discrepancy in, like, the way that she puts her weight on her legs. Here, the weight is on the left. Now the weight is on the right. That's left and right for us. Like, you can see she's shifting her weight around as well, which is what gives it that slightly sort of dance-like quality, like that little hip wiggle, that little shifting of the weight back and forth, that makes it just a little bit more energetic and interesting than if she was merely bouncing up and down. There's also stuff going on with like the physics objects here. Now, I don't know if these things are animated by procedurally generated physics in the engine, which some pieces of a character is in League of Legends, or if this is all hand animated and keyframed. But regardless, there's a lot of secondary motion going on with Zeri. Which is to say, the primary motion is that the body is doing a thing, right? Like the body is bouncing up and down, the body is moving back and forth, the body itself is doing stuff. And then she has a bunch of stuff attached to her, which follows that movement. So it's like a secondary motion that follows the primary motion. So that's the jacket, that's the hair, to a certain extent that's the gun, where you can see that they don't move simultaneous with Zeri, but they move in reaction to her, and they sort of keep bouncing around and sort of settling and moving after Zeri herself has stopped moving. And that adds a lot of complexity to what this animation even looks like in motion, because you can see how, like, especially pay attention to the jacket's collar here. As Zeri, her body begins to fall down into the bounce, right? You can see how the jacket kind of gets left behind, and it has to follow and then bounces down. And as it is about to reach the ground, that's when Zeri bounces back up and pulls the jacket along with her. So it's always sort of following behind the rhythm of her bounces, where like it's bouncing up when she's coming down, it's coming down when she's bouncing up. And that's part of what gives her little bouncing like this really sort of lovely weighty feeling to it, and it gives the jacket like a lot of sort of a sense of being loose and full, and like not being a thing that's like tightly clinging to her body. It gives her this sort of airy feeling, like a sort of sense of freedom of movement to me. And her hair pieces are very much being used to do the same thing, like adding a little bit of that secondary motion flavor to her movement. Like it would be very easy, especially when you have characters that have sort of anime-ish hair, to make her hair like very static and very stiff, because that's typically how anime hair tends to work. But with Zeri, there is a lot of secondary motion that goes into her little pigtails, that goes into the hair itself, that adds a lot of appeal to her quick motion in a lot of places, which like I really genuinely quite appreciate that. And speaking of animation that tells the story of a character, here is Zeri's taunt animation. And I really like this one, because with taunts, like, there's a lot of different ways you can go. When your character is taunting someone else, how do they do that? And if you're like Swain, for example, you might go, oh, well, I know all of your secrets and I shall destroy you. Like, you might go something smug, kind of laid back, confident, quiet. If you're someone like Eve, you might be seductive, like, oh, come at me, big boy, like, whatever. There's a lot of different ways that a character can taunt, and a lot of taunts tend to be sort of just like confident, cocky, arrogant, sort of laid back, I'm cooler than you, you suck kind of thing. That's sort of a standard way to go with the taunt. Not so much Zeri, though. Like, regardless of her voice lines, look at the acting that her character model is doing right there. She's sliding back on her heel, she's pounding her chest like a gym bro, and then she does this step forward, like pushing her whole body and her chest and her upper body forward, like, what, you want to make something of it, bro? You want to make something? You'll come at me? Like, literally challenging a person to a fight, which is like the other version of a taunt, is one that says, like, come fucking fight me, bro. And I like that fierceness. Like, I like that there is a little bit of that physical aggression, that there's a little bit of that anger being represented in her animation, because Zeri is, in many ways, an angry character. Like, she's someone who is... like, she acts in defense of her community. That's the main thing that she's concerned about, is that nobody fucking hurts my neighborhood. Like, nobody hurts my community. Nobody hurts my friends. I'm defending this thing, and if you want to make something of it, then come at me, bro, because I can take you, she says with all the overconfident eagerness of, you know, a teenager who has superpowers and has discovered how to use them. And I think that really works for her character. I like that there is this sense of physical aggression to her that sort of displays that, like, yeah, but Zeri is angry. Like, that's part of the thing that motivates her, is she sees the injustice done to her community, and she's gonna kick everyone's ass who tries to fucking mess with them. I like that. Like, it tells the story of the character. I also like, and this is something we can talk about here, the roller skating aesthetic that they've put onto Zeri's movement animation. Because, like, we can't see it in the model viewer, but Zeri's movement animation, a lot of it relies on her skating around on the electricity that's coming out of her feet. And you can see that happening here. Like, she slides back on the heel, she does this little shuffle back and forth with her legs as she moves back into her idle pose from the taunt. And they give her, like, a particular movement aesthetic that I'm really kind of fond of. Like, I like that, yeah, she's skating around on the electricity, but that's not just for her running animation, that's not just for her movement, that comes through in the way that she just, like, acts casually as well. Like, Zeri goes around the world used to being able to skate around on electricity, and that influences the way that she acts physically. So when she's taunting someone, it's very natural for her to do the electric glide thing that she does, because that's just part of who she is as a person. Like, her powers are expressed physically in the way that she moves, in more than just her movement from point A to point B, but also her acting. The way that she acts, the way she interacts with her body, the way that she, like, returns to an idle pose after, like, doing such a forward dash. Like, she'll just kind of naturally shuffle her feet back and forth in this elegant little, like, whoop, whoop, kind of... Is it rollerblading, or is it almost more like ice skating? It's sort of a mix of both, I suppose. And I like that. Like, it shows off part of who she is. So if we slow this one down, we can kind of get a better look at, again, what's going on. Now, once again, notice the jacket. Notice, like, all the secondary motion that's happening in the hair, like the way that the gun and its weight is sometimes being used to sort of accentuate what she's doing. But we can also see some of the classic animation principles being applied a little bit here. Now, Zeri does have some great smear frames, and we'll get to those. But here, more specifically, pay attention to her leg here. Let's zoom in on it, actually. You see how it gets stretched just a little bit? Like, her foot here, essentially, even though her body is sliding backwards and should be pulling the foot with her, it kind of just stays in place and then eventually kind of follows in an elastic sort of way. And that's part of what gives the animation that pop, right? Like that. Like when she kind of pops back on her heel and then like she dashes forward, those little squash and stretch principles are being used all over her model in little subtle ways to sort of enhance the sense of movement that you've got out of her. And that's also something that helps, like, again, when we're talking about League of Legends animation, usually being seen from this perspective, doing those small exaggerations that, like, in a show like Arcane, you might have more trouble getting away with them. Like, it might give the character sort of a rubbery feel that you don't really want for something like that. But when you're looking from this, like, far-out perspective, where you're not going to be paying close attention to the specific physics of a character as they animate, those little extra things, like when you mess with the model a little bit, when you make it into rubber, when you stretch it, when you squash it in ways that aren't really physically possible, it doesn't give you that Looney Tunes feeling necessarily. It doesn't really necessarily give you that, oh, this is a cartoon character, not a flesh and blood person. It just sort of accentuates the thing that's going on. And that's, like, all over her character animation. Pay attention also to the little thing that they're doing with the chest as Zeri pounds herself on the chest. Like, you see that? You see the thing that they do? Look at her jaw. Right? You see how they lead with the jaw, lean the jaw into it a little bit, then the pound comes, and you can see how, like, her shoulder kind of kicks back to react to it. And then she goes into this, like, and you can really see them doing the squash and stretch on the hair, especially. Like, the hair is used a lot because it's a huge part of her silhouette. So the hair is used a lot to accentuate the rest of her motion and her movement, like to really emphasize what she's doing. And you can kind of see how that little deformation of her silhouette helps the acting of the character come through. I really like that. Like, Zeri's hair especially is being used in some really good ways with her character animation. Anyway, it wouldn't be an animation section without a few smear frames, would it? So to that end, we're looking at, well, the first half, anyway, of Zeri's attack animation. And you can probably see it if you're paying attention right now, the smear frames that we're going to be looking at. But it's going to become more and more apparent as I lower the speed of the animation. Exactly just how much smearing and how much, well, I say smearing, it's squash and stretch, really, that's going on here. Smear frames are sort of more a thing from 2D animation. You kind of don't do that with something like that. You're just squashing and stretching the character model, but that's that's a lot of arm, as Zeri tells you to take the L. Of course, this is only half the animation. It's supposed to loop like that back into sort of this standing posture when she's, like, got her finger out. This is technically her auto attack animation. It's not really, because her auto attack is supposed to be her cue, but this is the one you get if you try to actually, you know, do auto attacks. Her other one, her other attack animation is no less hilarious to see in slow motion, because it is genuinely just so wildly exaggerated. And the reason why becomes clear, once again, if we zoom out and we go to in-game League of Legends perspective. Because from out here, the distortion doesn't seem nearly as extreme, does it? From out here, it barely looks like she's being distorted at all. And that, of course, is the reason why the animators do it. Squashing, stretching, like deforming the model, breaking the character model has to be wildly exaggerated to be readable, to be seen, or to be disruptive on a long distance. Without that close perspective, even if I slow it way down, it still doesn't look nearly as extreme in terms of distortion as it does if we zoom in close and we can actually see what's going on with her arm. And for me, this is just like the world's worst baseball pitch. That, of course, then resolves out to the character model sort of coming back down together. And even here, like, you can see, like, the graspy sort of hand-claw thing that she's doing. Even that is wildly exciting. Like, you can't, unless you're quite hypermobile, you probably can't do that with your finger. But even that is wildly exaggerated because, once again, we're seeing it from out here, so there needs to be more distance between the fingers to avoid them just kind of blurring together into one mass. It needs to not look like a slap. It needs to look like she's doing like a grabbing thing with like a claw hand or whatever. And so, like, they need to be spread apart, extra exaggerated. Funny though it may look to us. This video was sponsored by Skillshare, and if you've been around on YouTube, you've probably heard of them already at least once or twice before. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for people who want to explore their creativity. If there's something you want to learn how to do, odds are pretty good that Skillshare can help. And if you sign up with the link in my description, you'll get a full month of access for free. Skillshare offers video series on self-organizing and prioritizing, including taking care of your mental health while trying to get work done. With a subscription, the service is ad-free with new premium classes launching each week, which are fully subtitled in Spanish, Portuguese, German, and French. One of my ambitions, after many years of clumsily imitating the program's functions in Premiere Pro, is to finally learn to edit with After Effects, in part to make videos like this one look a little bit nicer and more professional. It's a long process, but in my moments of spare time, I've been looking at videos like Jake Bartlett's course on kinetic typography to try and get to grips with how the program animates. Skillshare has this and dozens of other series besides on every creative endeavor under the sun, so once again, use the link in my description for 1 month free access to Skillshare and start exploring your own creativity. This is the segment where we imagine a different world, a better world, a world where League of Legends champions can be reasonably expected to have storylines that go somewhere and which are actively developed and maintained on a regular basis rather than pushed in fits and starts based on the random whims of Riot's management. In other words, this is the segment where I write fanfiction and pretend that it's analysis. With Zeri, though, honestly, all I really want for her right now is for the plot thread that Riot has already set up for her to continue. At the end of her color story, she runs into Ekko, whose parents she unknowingly rescued from a Chem Baron's clutches, and it's implied that Ekko is going to make himself her friend and ally, and that they will be defending the community's Luzon against exploitation together. And that's a really solid plot hook. Bring in Ekko's squad of pals from Legends of Runeterra and let them all have plucky street kid science adventures, getting one over on the Pilties and the Barons. Honestly, I could ask for nothing more than that. I would be so happy. But if we were to look beyond the immediate into the long term, well, in my opinion, a hero doesn't become truly interesting until they are challenged on their principles and have to navigate doubt. The classic and somewhat simplistic example is Superman doesn't kill, so confront him with a trolley problem where seemingly the only way to save lives is to take life. Here's Zack Snyder demonstrating how to do that in the most boring and uninspired way possible.
Never. Well, I've done all I can do.
God, Man of Steel sucked. Jesus. Anyway, to do that same story beat with Zeri, well, she's someone who believes deeply in protecting her community. This is her goal, her central driving motivation. So, if a bunch of Chem Baron thugs come in and attack her community, that's a no-brainer, just kick them out. But what if, say, a wealthy businesswoman arrived and started investing in healthcare for the community? What if she spent her money to build out the infrastructure, improve housing, make food available, clean up pollution? What if she builds schools and playgrounds, funds libraries, and uses her personal security forces to kick out the other Chem Baron's enforcers, making the streets safe at night? And what if in return she asks for nothing? Nothing at all, not even favors, not even loyalty, although she starts to receive it. These are Renata Glask's methods. And I think obviously Zeri immediately smells the bullshit at the heart of that plan. Hell, I think a lot of her community are going to be suspicious right off the bat. But when your child is sick and needs doctors and medicine, you go to the clinic that has doctors and medicine. You don't really care who funds it. Maybe Glask has ulterior motives for doing it, but that poison swamp that used to be a park did get cleaned up, and the park is back now. The streets did become safe at night. Fewer people are starving. More people have clean water, and she never asks for anything. Do you starve yourself on principle and suspicion, or do you eat the meal that's in front of you? And after a good long while of that, with Zeri's home neighborhood becoming used to the benefits that Glask's patronage is bringing, let's say that Ekko turns up, and he has this pink-haired frilly pop star he knows with him, and he tells her that it's all a trick, it's a plot. He tells her that Seraphine found out that Renata Glask is spending her money on philanthropy to get nominated for a humanitarian prize in Piltover. At the acceptance ceremony, she's going to release a chemical gas into the room and mind control all the richest people in Piltover. That's why she's doing it. That's why she's spending all this money. And Zeri goes, "Aha, I knew something was up," and the trio goes on a daring heist into Renata Glask's mansion to confront her and tell her that we have the dirt on you. We know what you're planning to do. And Renata Glask turns around in her chair and tells Zeri, "Oh, of course, darling, if that's what you want, by all means, expose me. Let the rich people know the filthy Zonite Chembaron has been lying. Of course, with my plans exposed, there's hardly any reason to keep running that medical clinic, is there? By the way, how is your grandmother's heart these days? I hear she's doing better." And Glask says that if her plan goes off without a hitch, well, she needs to keep up appearances. She can't close the schools. She can't close the food bank. Oh, I'm not an angel, darling, but our interests align. And if you stop me, well, who are you helping? A room full of the richest, most odious oligarchs you have ever seen? A cohort of self-congratulating hypocrites who wouldn't spit on your house if it was on fire? They were happy to ignore you while you die in poverty before, and they'll be happy to after. Do you think they will thank you? Are they part of your community? And Seraphine is shouting that this is wrong, that we have to stop her. And Ekko is saying that she's just using you and she can't be trusted. And they're not wrong, but Zeri's grandmother needs that heart medicine. There are kids on her streets who are getting 3 meals a day for the first time in their lives, and Zeri's job is to protect her community, the people around her, her family, her friends, the people who have been there for her. That's who she is. That's what she's about. Could she hurt them to save some rich strangers who don't care about her or her community, who would never do the same in return? And I'm not saying that Zeri should side with Renata Glask. Renata is pretty clearly cast as a villain to Zeri in the lore as it stands, although it would be interesting if she did turn to Renata's side, even if briefly. I'm saying that Zeri should be confronted by a difficult choice. She should have to answer some hard questions about what exactly community means and what protecting it means. And in dealing with that challenge, no matter how she answers it, Zeri becomes a more interesting character. How would you have Zeri answer Renata Glask, by the way? How do you think she solves that trolley problem? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, this is where I would usually wrap up the video, but last night I was haunted by a psychic vision from across the boundaries of time and space, and I saw there my counterpart from an alternate dimension who is exactly like me in every way, except he's not in the League Partner Program. And he said he wanted to talk about a video game character or something? I don't really know, but let's hang on a second, and I'll drop you all unprotected into the warp so that you can go and see what he wants. Oh, and if you see Slanesh on the way, tell them to call me. I miss them.
Hey, thanks, alternate universe Skyen, and wow, you sound exactly like me in every way. Anyway, over here in my mirror universe, we don't have Zeri from League of Legends, whatever that is, but we have another character who is suspiciously a lot like her, and she's called Neon. Valorant lore is interesting because the game itself exists in a sort of halfway space between Overwatch and Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike doesn't really have any story, at least not that I'm aware of. It's essentially cops and robbers by another name. One side is the good guys, the other side is the bad guys. Shoot guns, plant bombs, bang bang, there you go. Overwatch, on the other hand, was supposed to have a rich and vibrant character-driven narrative universe, told in a living world that reacted to story developments. Activision Blizzard kinda the entire bed on that one, while they were busy the bed on every other aspect of their business. but Overwatch, at least theoretically, was supposed to have a highly developed lore and narrative. Overwatch took the approach of basically not bothering to justify the core gameplay with narrative. Mortal enemies can play on the same side, multiple copies of the same hero can be on the battlefield, and the objectives on the map have basically nothing to do with the narrative at all and are just about enabling gameplay. As far as Overwatch is concerned, its main gameplay action is not canon. Valorant, on the other hand, actually goes for it and tries to make its action canon friendly. In fact, the entire premise of its story seems precision engineered specifically to narratively justify the main gameplay, including how there can be two copies of the same person on the battlefield. The way it works is basically there are two parallel Earths in different dimensions. One Earth has advanced teleportation technology and a massive energy crisis. The other Earth has somewhat less advanced technology and tons of energy resources. So Energy Crisis Earth sends their Valorant agents to the Energy Rich Earth to steal their energy. The Energy Rich Earth deploys its Valorant agents to defend their energy resources against theft. We are, as in Counter-Strike, once again playing cops and robbers, and the characters obviously have to confront the weirdness of having to literally fight alternate versions of themselves and what that means for them. Which leads us to Neon. As a character, she's a young Filipino woman and the youngest of the Valorant team. She's confident, cheerful, a little cocky, and a bit of a little sister to her fellow agents. She's deeply connected to her family and her community, and teeters on that young adult edge between an eagerness to prove herself and an uncertainty about whether she can live up to expectations. Neon doesn't have a lot of lore. Most agents don't, at least not in the way that alternate universe Skyen tells me that they do in that League of Legends game. There isn't a biography and a set of short stories here. There's a tiny blurb, a launch trailer, and then a series of Easter egg story drops that are just more teasers than actual developed stories, hinting at deeper themes and narratives. For example, there's an undercurrent to Neon's story that she struggles somewhat with control. She wears a surge protector on her body to prevent her powers from exploding at the wrong time. And if we interpret her launch trailer, she seems to have some sort of trauma or strong sensory memory related to uncontrolled power releases. Her Valorant co-agents have an internal debate on whether she should forego the restraining surge protector in order to be more effective on missions, but she insists on keeping it, and as part of an ongoing in-game lore thing, a blackmailing hacker essentially mocks her for her lack of control in a way that implies it's a really sore subject for her.
Hi, sorry, just breaking the fourth wall here. I wrote this script quite a long time ago, and I haven't gotten around to actually finishing up the video for it until now, so, yeah, Fade was fully revealed. She's a hacker who communes with nightmares, which seems to be part of the reason why she has so much personal information on the agents, and seems to be part of the reason why she targeted Neon with taunts about her worst fears, because, you know, nightmares. It's not out of personal malice, but just because she was fighting with the Valorant organization in general before switching sides and deciding that they're the good guys and she's gonna fight with them. Valorant lore. This is what happens when you write a script months before you actually get around to finishing a video.
Insofar as Neon has a theme to her, it's as we mentioned, being a young adult teetering between the eagerness to prove herself and insecurity about being up to the task. Her unstable powers, which are affected by her emotions, act as a kind of metaphor to the precarious point she's at as a person. Her powers are immature, just as she's immature. Not in the sense of being juvenile or childish, but in the sense of not yet having fully self-actualized as a person. She's a young woman still grasping for the confidence in who she is. At least that's how I interpret it. I'm working with a fairly limited amount of source material here, so we have to do some reaching. And you might notice that while there are no Chem Barons in Valorant, or well, I guess there's Viper. But while there are no Chem Barons or Zon in Valorant, and she isn't living at home in her community, Neon is Zeri, Zeri is Neon. These are quite literally the same character existing in two realities, which becomes even more obvious when you look at character design in Valorant operates under one huge limitation. Every character has to fit into a very narrow silhouette profile, because every character needs to have identical hitboxes for the purposes of game balance. Getting a headshot should not be noticeably easier or harder on any one character regardless of their design. For the old people in this audience, we call it the no odd job rule. Shout out to the Nintendo 64 kids. This leads to Valorant's agents having, in my opinion, less interesting character design than their counterparts in, say, Apex Legends or especially Overwatch. But on the other hand, they are miles and miles more interesting than the snooze-fest modern military mediocrity that dominates games like Call of Duty and Counter-Strike. So Neon has the generic fit, athletic female body number 493, which works with her character and is in fact a good choice. She's meant to be a nimble, agile sprinter, she's meant to look like a young, slight and slender athlete, and the design does a good job of getting that across. One thing I noticed on her model, by the way, which I really like, is the use of sharp angles on her calves and around her lower legs. Neon is meant to be electric, and a good visual way to show that is with spiky, jagged angles. This is present in her hair as well, which really leans hard into the electric blue and frizzy feel. And while that's good, I kinda wish that this was a bit more consistent across her whole model. A lot of her character model defaults to softer curves and more rounded biological shapes, and I wish they'd carry the angularity through a bit more. I wish that Neon would be noticeably sharper and more prone to straight angles than other characters. Like, when the game design forces you to use standardized generic proportions for all your characters, I think that kinda calls for going a little bit harder on stylizing and pushing the expressions of the parts of the character that you can change. There's a great visual idea here, and I think it could have been taken further. Okay, there's honestly not much to say here. Neon's primary narrative struggle is, as we've covered, lack of control. So much like Zeri should be challenged by a villain that exploits her love of community, well, that's kind of the challenge Neon would need as well. A villain who perhaps forces her into a situation where if she wants to be a Valorant agent, if she wants to live up to her potential, she has to push herself beyond her boundaries and risk losing control. So something like her team is in trouble and she needs to do a big unprotected surge of power to save them, that sort of thing. And the act of doing it is not only an act of self-sacrifice in defense of others, but also a reckoning with her own fear of losing her grip on herself or her own humanity. It's a classic superhero storytelling trope to explore how people with extraordinary powers relate to their own humanity, how they fear becoming different and alienated from those they love. For Neon, who seems to have a strong connection to her family, perhaps losing control of her powers is associated with a fear of losing the love of her family who have taught her to hold it down. Maybe losing control is associated with being rejected by her community, with being called an outsider. And if insecurity and fear is the name of the game, what if she came face to face with a Neon from an alternate universe who's just a little bit more confident? What if she's a little bit more cool, a little bit more collected, seems to have a bit more respect from her peers, seems to have her powers just a little bit better handled, seems to be a little bit more in control? Oh hey, here's a fun idea. What if Neon from the alternate universe was named Zeri? So at the end of all this, there's one question that keeps going around in my head about Neon and Zeri, which is, hey, what are you doing? Hey, no! No! Fuck it!
My power grows once again. Anyway, at the end of all of this, there's one question that keeps going around in my head about Zeri and Neon, which is, why bother? Why take the same character and create her twice in different and apparently unconnected universes? And the cynical answer there, I suppose, is corporate cross-brand, promotional brand, synergy awareness, integration, brand alignment, metaverse promotion. That Zeri, by emulating some of the gameplay patterns of an FPS, could be a way to draw in the Valorant crowd to League of Legends, and that Neon somehow could attract the League of Legends community to the shooter game. And it's hard not to take the cynical view here, because that kind of seems to be all that they have done with it. The extent of Riot's messaging around the character is that Neon is Zeri and Zeri is Neon, and oh wow, isn't it kooky that the same character is in both games? Maybe you should try the other one, haha. And outside of that momentary novelty, that little gimmick, at least as far as Riot has communicated, there's no point to, and no reason to care about, Zeri and Neon's connection. There's no point to it beyond cross-brand, synergistic promotion, IP management, metaverse nonsense. Which brings us back to that thing we put a pin in back when I was being critical of Zeri's character design. Like I said, she's not bad, but her design is constrained by some generic and generally overused design tropes. She has the kind of generically athletic, conventionally attractive design that so many other characters also have. And the question that keeps coming back to me is, was Zeri designed to look that way because that's what's right for her character, because that was the most interesting creative choice, because it expresses her identity and her story? Or was she designed this way because she needed to look like Neon? Neon needs to look the way she does because of the constraints of Valorant's game design, and they did a good job within those constraints. But because Zeri needs to look like Neon, Zeri essentially has to conform to the design limitations of a game she isn't in. And that might be a good trade-off if there was some sort of point to it, if tying these two characters together was meant to set up a good story, if it was meant to illuminate something about who either character is, if it was meant to drive some sort of meaning. But if the whole point of it was to do a gimmicky cross-promotion metaverse thing between two games in the hopes of driving new players to spend more money and time on the company's other products, then as a design decision, that's short-sighted, boring, and honestly kind of disrespectful to the character. Zeri and Neon both deserve better than that. Now, all of that said, there is another aspect to this, which is that Zeri is, specifically, a Filipina woman. I don't especially want to have to relitigate the entire conversation about representation in media and whether and how it matters or what form it should take, and all the tedious culture war bullshit that's surrounding it, at least not in this video. We're just going to accept that it has cultural, artistic, and creative value, and move on to a more interesting question, like, for example, how do you do that kind of representation for real-world groups in a high fantasy setting? Because there is no Philippines on Runeterra. Ionia is a sort of big pan-Asian mix of dozens and dozens of cultures, but Zeri lives in Zon, a region which is patterned after late 19th century European industrialization, and which is multiracial and multicultural. So how do you tell the audience to understand Zeri not just as yet another working-class kid within the fiction of the universe, but as a representation of a very specific real-world group? Members of that group and people who live alongside them might pick up on cultural clues, like accents or patterns of speech or vocabulary and certain behaviors. But how do you make it explicit to people who aren't clued in to those sometimes rather subtle contexts? Well, if Zeri is Neon, and Neon is literally Filipina because the Philippines do exist in her world, then Zeri, by the transitive property, must be Filipina as well. And there is perhaps the point of the crossover, the point of transposing the character from one universe into another, to make explicit that which in fantasy can usually only be implied. It is a way to say that Zeri is Filipina, and that while Filipino people don't literally exist in Runeterra, they still belong there. It can be a way to say that that culture, that people, that self-understanding, that identity is canonically and explicitly part of what Runeterra is supposed to be. Zeri has a voice line that supports that, by the way, and so does Neon.
I belong here. We all belong here.
I belong here. We all belong here.
And I'll let her writer, Michael Luo, tell you in his own words why they have that voice line. Back in March 2021, I read this article. It's the reason Neon and Zeri say, I belong here, we all belong here. A reminder, stop Asian hate. Like I said, I don't want to relitigate the entire question of representation in the media, but if you want to know why it matters to people, and not just as a mere tee-hee, the person in the video game looks like me novelty, this is one of the reasons why. Culture is a way that we define what we means, who gets to be a part of that, and there are people in the world right now who are trying to build an idea of we that violently excommunicates a lot of people. This isn't just theoretical discourse wank, this is stuff that affects people's lives. And none of this negates my criticisms. I still think that the crossover had lackluster implementation, and I still think Zeri's design could be more interesting if it wasn't locked down by the restrictions of Valorant. But in design, everything is a trade-off. Riot traded off design freedom for Zeri in favor of a cross-universe connection with Neon, which they mostly publicized as a corporate cross-promotional brand synergy thing, but which arguably has a function as it relates to representation. So, if we take all of that together, does it mean that Zeri's character design is good, or is it bad? Well, no. And forgive me a bit of self-indulgent ranting, but something that does bother me is when people watch my videos and seem to come away from them with this wildly binary understanding of what I'm trying to say. I have a number of criticisms of Seraphine's character design and lore, and I spent over an hour trying to explain why in nuanced terms, but the reputation I seem to have gotten out of that is that I'm a Seraphine hater who despises her. Same thing with Kai'Sa. I have big problems with her character design, but people talk to me like they think I want to burn the character off the face of the earth. I criticize the over-reliance on sex appeal and beauty as character design defaults, especially in female characters, because it leads to derivative and boring design, in my opinion, and reinforces objectively harmful body ideals for men and women, and online people talk about me like I'm a misogynist who thinks tits are evil. And I know the internet is the internet. There are always going to be people who are determined to understand you in the worst possible faith no matter what you say, and there's really nothing I can do to fix that, but please indulge me for a second while I vent about it, because Jesus fucking Christ. Anyway, I think Zeri's design is compromised. It uses some boring, overused design tropes, and I don't like that they limited her design expression for a crossover gimmick that doesn't really seem to matter to the character all that much. I think it's a waste of potential, and I think it's wasted in the name of something that kind of really just looks like either corporate metaverse bullshit or a mere trivial novelty. In addition to that, I also think that there is a lot of value in having representation for an otherwise underrepresented community in franchises as big as Valorant and League of Legends. Doing the crossover helped make that representation explicit, which is good. It's a good part of both characters. My criticisms do not eradicate my praise. They are not weighted against each other like a heart against a feather. Art and criticism is more complicated than a tier list ranking. Hey, thank you for watching another episode of What's the Deal? Did you like the new music? I figured it was about time to stop using Riot's music and actually get my own. It was composed by the fine folks over at The Brew Canoe, who very kindly put up with my endless edits and rambling feedback. I've been sick for the first half of May, and it took me about the entire latter half of it to recover. This video was supposed to come out like 2 months ago at this point. I didn't have the Rona, fortunately, but it turns out there's all kinds of other respiratory infections you can get. It's a diverse and competitive market. Anyway, thank you very much to my alternate universe counterpart who I murdered in order to consume his soul. It was lovely to have him in the video. I'm gonna leave a link to his YouTube channel in the description, and you can go there to post Fs to pay respects in the comments of whichever videos that it would be funniest to post those comments on. And when a video is sponsored, I don't usually do the self-promotion bit, like, comment, subscribe, Patreon stuff, so I'm kind of out of things to say. Which is a problem because I want the Patreon names to scroll so people get to see to see that their names are there, because it's kind of the credits of my videos. So Belveth is cool. The whole new champion came out while I was working on this thing. I like her. I did a stream about her. I definitely have a lot more thoughts about her character, like the way that the Void interacts with her character design, because one of the questions that people have been asking is hey, hang on, if she's the Empress of the Void, why does she need a human face? Why is she doing this whole playing dress-up thing? And I think that's a really interesting question, specifically because it's Jared Rosen writing her, and I think what's going on with her is that the reason why she's playing pretend at being a human is that, okay, I think the video has scrolled far enough now, so wear your mask, take your vaccines, wash your hands, just try and be kind to other people, and act with solidarity when you can towards those who are worse off than yourself.